Your word, O Lord, is a lamp to our feet. As Greg said, today's reading describes the Transfiguration and an event that happened the day after. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James, and they went up the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. But as they woke, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things that they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd came and shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and to put up with you? Bring your son here." While he was being brought forward, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. May your word live in us.
And bear much fruit to your glory. So that's a mountaintop near Lucerne, with a village that's right up on the top of the mountain. And we went up and we had a look at their cows, tasted their cheese, and the things that they had made. And I was struck by the mountaintop and the snow when we were down in the valley down below. The other thing is that I noticed there's something in that picture that gives you a hint of something that could happen. What might that be? Ski field, yep, could be. Yep, the poles, yep. Avalanche. Oh, there, yes. Okay. The other thing I can see is, I reckon there's something happening with these poles. Is that the ski that you're talking about? Yeah. Because there are other spots around there where you have poles like that, and it actually means you can get up the top without having to walk, which is a lot better than walking a long distance uphill. Now, I said before about valley people and about valleys and mountains. I came across a definition. When you look at a picture, are you more drawn to the mountain or to the valley? It's the mountain? Interesting. Because I found a description of whether you're a valley or a mountain person. And this says, a mountain person is typically described as someone who thrives on challenges, avalanches included, enjoys pushing boundaries, seeks adventure, and is comfortable with steep climbs and obstacles. There's probably one or two people here that would really identify with that. So that's a mountain person. What do you think would be the definition of a valley person? I'll tell you. So in this particular person writing this said, while a valley person prefers stability, calmness, a more level ground, a sense of security and routine. Essentially, the metaphor compares someone's personality to the terrain they might be drawn to in nature. So what he's wondering is whether the terrain you're drawn to, what it says about you. Now, think about it for yourself. Think what terrain you're drawn to. Does that identify? Maybe, maybe not. For some, maybe not. Yep. Bit of both. Because the question, where does real life happen? In the valleys. Where are most people? In the valleys. Where is the most trauma? In the valleys. Where is the most joy? Well, there's a small amount of people that get the joy on the mountain. But there's a lot of joy in the valley as well, isn't there? So it's not either or. Sorry, it's not one or the other, it's either or. So for the disciples, the question was, Peter was saying, let's create a monument, an ongoing presence on the mountain because this has been an amazing experience. And Jesus' response was, Master, let it be good for us here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Not realising what he's saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified. As they entered the cloud, then from the cloud came a voice saying, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." When the voice had spoken to Jesus, they found Jesus alone. Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent in those days, told no one about the things that they had seen. How many people have you told about your mountaintop experience? Because we don't always tell people because for a whole lot of reasons. Because sometimes we're still working out the significance of those mountaintop experiences. Sometimes they're a bit scary because it might challenge us to do something. What did Jesus say to Peter? Nothing. It was God that spoke, who said, "Listen to my son." And that's what spiritual formation, Visio Lectio is talking about, Lectio Divina is talking about. It's actually looking at listening to what God's saying to us through a number of different ways. Because we often get it wrong. We work out what God's going to do, what God is, and we keep God in that little space, and that feels comfortable, because then God can't challenge us to actually do something that's uncomfortable. Or for whatever reason that we keep God in that box. But God cannot be confined in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our experience. God cannot be fully contained within them. We catch glimpses of God in the midst of our experience, but it's actually we can't fully contain because God is always other than us in that regard. Question of whether we allow the transparency of what God's trying to reveal to us to come through, or whether we prefer it to be opaque because that's more comfortable. And what we do in response to our mountaintop experiences. Now, the context of this reading. How many people read the readings before the service? They're in the notice sheet, David, aren't they? Yeah. It's always good to have a read, but also it's always good to just have a sneak read of what went before and what went after, because sometimes there's a clue in that. So, chapter 9, the mission of the 12. The 12 go out and they come back, and it says that they departed, went through villages, bringing good news and curing diseases everywhere. One suspects they weren't doing so well with exorcism, though. We'll come back to that. Then there was the feeding of the 5,000. Then Peter's declaration about Jesus being the Son of God. And Jesus' response to that was, the Son of Man must suffer. Peter didn't really understand that. And then we have the transfiguration. And the boy that's healed by Jesus but not by the disciples. And after that, verse 43, they were all astounded at the greatness of God. So what does Luke have Jesus talk about then? Anyone give a guess? He talks again about his foretelling his death. There's something there in the midst of that where Jesus has to keep saying about the suffering. Then we have the story about true greatness. The disciples all say, well, we're a bit good. And I'm gooder than you. I'm better than you. And Jesus takes a child, and the least among you is the greatest of all. There's another exorcism. And then Jesus talks about the people who follow him. And there were people who said they had to bury their father. They had to do a whole lot of stuff. And Jesus said, no one who puts a hand to the plough and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. So when you look at the whole flow, that's a very condensed chapter, isn't it? Of a whole lot of things that are there. Of the things the disciples did, of what Jesus did. The disciples had to go down the valley with Jesus. Jesus talked about his suffering. Now, it's very easy to think that suffering is Easter, especially as we're moving in that direction, aren't we? Especially after pancakes. But is that all that Jesus was meaning by suffering, or is there something much deeper? Because Jesus, going down the mountains, got straight involved with the Father and the Son and the child that needed to be set free. Jesus continued to get involved alongside people in their suffering. I wonder whether there could be something in that he has to suffer, is that actually there is a cost of getting involved with people who are experiencing difficulty, people who are suffering. And it's not just an Easter thing, it's an everyday thing. It's the way that Jesus lived his life. The way Jesus lived his life, that's the way that God works. The invitation to be with people in the everyday situation. The mountaintop experiences and the times where we gather in worship and we feel really warm and connected with God and safe, they're all important parts of our spiritual formation. But that's to help equip us for those times where we see something where our heart goes out for someone or a situation, and we have to make the decision, do we get engaged or do we say that's someone else's problem? And think, what would Jesus do in this situation? And what is God saying to us in this situation? What's the response that God is calling us to respond with? Mountains and valleys. May God help us in the midst of help us as we take full stock of what God reveals to us in those mountaintop experiences, and may we have the faith to trust God to reveal even more things to us in those experiences in the valleys as we sit with people in their lives.